Hey everybody, it's Kitty Care again, and I'm bringing you today an in-depth, great review of Friday the 13th Part 2. I did the first one, did had some fun with it, went in depth with it. Um, favorite character, favorite kill, worst character, piece of merchandise you can buy, an action figure. I'm gonna do this again in this review. A few fun facts, maybe some unknown facts by some. Um, again, Friday the 13th Part 2 from 1981, directed by, this time by Steve Miner. Now, Steve Miner, he worked together with Sean S. Cunningham on the first movie. But this time Sean was a writer, co-writing it with Victor Miller. Victor Miller also wrote the first one, and he also wrote the graphic novel, which had the, I think, non-canon father of Jason in it, Elias Voorhees, because at that time Mrs. Voorhees didn't have a first name yet. We know her first name. I think the first time we see her first name is on a tombstone in Friday the 13th Part 4, when they drive past the grave, the unhappy campers with Crispin Glover in the back, Pamela Voorhees, but back then they called her Doris Voorhees, and they actually wanted to call, Victor Miller wanted to call Jason Josh Voorhees, and then he said it doesn't sound menacing, so he said Jason. Now, actually, Jason is cooler, yeah. Same with like Michael Myers. If you had, Halloween Ends, Corey from Corey Feldman. No, but Michael, I'm sure a more angelic name, maybe. I'm just shooting the shift here, but eventually Steve Miner did a good job with this. Got same score, I believe, 6.1 as the first one, but it gets an 8. By me, it's my second favorite one. A lot of people don't like this one because it has the sackhead Jason. They don't like the sackhead. They don't like the suspender pants. They don't like the plated shirt, the hillbilly look. They don't like the hillbilly look of Jason. But I thought the only thing that I didn't like with Jason is the hair and the beard. He had hair and a beard on half of his side, and I do understand that he's now a wild man living from nature, and he had a shack where he had a fucking toilet. So he had some accommodations, but then you couldn't see his deformities. The eye that was hanging lower. You couldn't. I liked bald Jason better. And the first Jason, that's something I forgot to mention, was actually Ari Aster. And that was the first Jason. That was the Jason who pulls Alice in the water. He played the first Jason, basically. Ari Aster. He's also in a band. The one who played Jason here, but only you had 3 people playing Jason in this one, weirdly enough. But that's for later. Now the story's basically a little bit more amped up. What they did is took a lot of the gore out. Now, of course, we all know there is an uncensored version, an uncut version floating around. I think it's for sale now. I'm not really sure. Is the deluxe edition? I have a picture here of a deluxe edition, and another picture here of an uncut version. Now, I'm not sure if those are the uncut versions, but I have the fan edited version. which has the uncut scenes but with a grainy look. But the best kills, in my opinion, that were cut out, you can see clearly. Um, and that actually kind of, those extra kills kind of changed my favorite kill a little bit in the movie. But I'm gonna give two favorite kills: the theatrical version and the uncut version. Um, the story is as follows. You know, the movie starts with Adrian King, the played, you know, Alice, the survivor of the first movie. You also have Betsy Palmer, Amy Steele, as one of my favorite final girls. Top three at least. Not because she fought with Jason a lot, but because she was smart. Mainly that, but she did one thing in the movie that I really liked, and that's for later. That no one in any of the Friday movies ever dared to do. So Alice is living in Crystal Lake. 2 months later, after the events of, I believe, 2 months later after the events of Camp Blood, you know, the massacre at Camp Crystal Lake. And apparently the movie takes place at that time in 1979, not in 1981, or no, because they went 5 years further, I believe. Sorry, no, yeah, five years. 5 years further after that, and that took place in 1984. So we get to see Alice, but because Alice had, like I said, a extremely dangerous stalker, she really didn't want to do the movie, and she said, "Listen, I'll do the movie for the fans, but give me a small role and let me be done with it. Okay, I just don't want to have anything to do with it." So eventually they gave her the role. You see, you know, she sees, of course, Mrs. Voorhees' head in the fridge, and she gets ice pick to her head. And of course, in the uncut version, you can see the ice pick, which is a weird kill in my opinion, going from here through her nose like she gets a nose piercing. It's a weird kill, and apparently that was filmed when all the filming was done. So she apparently when she was ready to do her part, she was waiting for a car. This yellow beetle came to pick her up to her house. She had to improvise a little bit. She was a great drawer, so she brought a few of her drawings. She in real life is a great drawer, and she didn't know what to suspect. She didn't have a script. She didn't have a idea. So every reaction was legit. Apparently, she knew she was gonna die, but she didn't know that there was gonna be a head in the fridge, you know, and that thing. And it was pretty cool. But apparently, she couldn't catch a break because in the first of all, the stalker. In the first movie, Betsy Palmer slapped her for real, and she started to cry because that wasn't the purpose of, you know, you gotta. She thought that she was gonna slap her, you know, this close from her face or something. And apparently, when we see the legs of Jason going through the water because it's raining, that was played by a lady, and she and the hands who killed Alice with the ice pick is also the lady. And because she wasn't a devout stunt woman, she did it multiple times wrong, and she stabbed her multiple times. It was a real ice pick, I mean, not it was a retractable ice pick, but it did hurt if you didn't put it on the right place. And she apparently she stabbed her multiple times at the wrong place, and it did hurt. So poor Alice, poor Adrian King. I mean, then of course the movie goes further to our story. We meet up again with two other characters, like in the original movie. You got Annie in the original one. Here you've got the character Jeff and Sandra, and you immediately think, oh, these are going to be our two main characters. But of course, we all know that that probably won't be true, knowing our first ordeal, thinking that Annie's going to be the main character. But it could have been, you know, a power couple, who knows. And you know, they're having a phone call in the town of Crystal Lake with Ted. He was the third in command of the. They're going to this this counseling training center for camp counselors, but they were all camp counselors, but they had to redo their training a little bit. And Paul Holt, another character played by John Fury, he's the boss. And the second in command was Amy Steele, Ginny, his, I'm guessing, girlfriend. But it's weird because she studied psychology, child psychology, and it's these guys are always waiting for these girls to come back. It looks like that when it's summertime, and then they have a relationship, they have sex, and it's like their boyfriend and girlfriend, and then they go away and it's gone again. It's weird. It's weird. I think it's on and off relationships, you know. Maybe back then, of course, you know, the young people, beautiful people, right? Now, that phone book was apparently fake, by the way, and there was this gag that when Jeff and Sandra see that their car is being towed, they're running after it. The scene's done. Another two girls are going to the phone booth to make a call, but they see that it doesn't work, and they're running away angry, and everybody start laughing because it was a fake phone booth. So that's a fun fact, actually. And then we meet Ted, the comedic relief, which is funny because we also had a comedic relief Ted in part 4. And for, I'm not sure, but a lot of these names of these, I'm just gonna say the campers who get killed. Okay, this is a spoiler review, by the way. You've got, okay, the counselors. You got Ted, you know, the third man. In part 4, you had Ted, who called himself Teddy Bear. Remember? He was comedic relief. You had Terry, sexy Terry. You had Sandra, like I said, Sandra and Jeff. Mark, the guy in a wheelchair, who was training. And I always thought, okay, he's training to become an arm wrestler. I'm guessing that was, but he always said, I'm in training. But he never really specified for what. So I'm guessing for arm wrestling, because he was constantly arm wrestling people. And then you had Vicky, who was infatuated with Mark, and Scott, who was infatuated with Terry. And of course, you had there were a lot more people, but at some point, so they're all, you know, getting trained and this, and they're, you know, they have to do all these things again, archery, going back to the basics. It's almost like a military camp. They have to jog through the woods and things like that. I mean, it looked like a fun time between a bunch of friends, right? But eventually there is this cop, this deputy that comes and picks up Jeff and Sandra because they heard about Camp Blood. The training center is at the same lake, Crystal Lake, as the lake of Camp Crystal Lake. you know, where the lake, I mean, the lake is situated at the same lake of Camp Crystal Lake. So that training center was pretty close by, and Jeff and Sandra really wanted to see it because Ted was talking about it, Camp Blood, and this and that. And I believe there's also this a campfire story that Paul is telling about Jason, that he's living in the wild, and that Jason saw his mother beheaded that night, and now he's seeking for revenge, and he's gonna kill everybody now. And then at some point Ted jumps out, and you've got that exact scene in The Burning, when the counselor there is telling this story about Cropsey, the killer in that movie. And I think Tom Savini stole that, probably got the script for that movie for part 2, Friday the 13th part 2. I think hey, you can use that and make it into a kind of practical joke or something, but kind of be right that Cropsey is a killer, in this case Jason being the killer, and bad Tom Savini. Now eventually Jeff and Sandra are picked up by this deputy, and you've got this weird conversation between Paul and this deputy, and this deputy is actually pretty right. He says, listen, you're too close, keep those kids out of there, right? I mean, and he's like sitting there, and I thought, he's kind of being a douchebag right now, right? And then he said to Jeff and Sarah, you can go now. And then he said, you're not gonna reprimand them? And then he says, oh, okay, Ginny, no seconds for desserts for Paul, for Jeff and Sandra. And then he's like, okay. But then of course we see the scene of the deputy seeing somebody with a burlap sack over his head running through the woods. He's going after him. We get this long prolonged chase scene, and the cop was clearly not in shape to keep up with Jason. Jason, who by the way, like I said, was played by 3 people. That lady who killed Alice, then a guy named Warrington Gillette, who wanted to play the role of Paul, but was a stuntman in training, so they gave a small part of Jason, the hairy Jason, at the end to him. And the original Jason that wore the mask was a guy named Steve Dash, but he wasn't credited in the original theatrical version, so he's pretty pissed off. And now he's credited, but back then he wasn't credited, apparently. I'm not sure, but that's pretty fucked up in my opinion. If you have a guy who Steve Dash was actually the Jason of part 2, a guy I never heard of, but yeah. Now Warrington Gillette also wanted to play young Jason in the beginning in the first movie, but he also was turned down, and so he really wanted to be in this movie, but he only got the role of the last sequence where you see the hairy Jason coming out of the window, taking Ginny. Now eventually the counselors get a chance to go to town to take some drinks, in the evening, and take the night off and go drinking, and like 70% of the camp goes away. You got a lot more people. Like I said, there were a lot more people there, but they needed a little bit less people because there were like 20 or maybe even more than 20 people there. So I think that was a little bit too much for Jason to kill. And eventually they all go to town, and the only ones who stay behind are, like I said, Sandra, Jeff, Mark, Vicky, Scott, and Terry. Um, and that's it. That's it. And Ginny and Paul, and then Ted, and then the three in command counselors. They go together. They are sitting on the counter together in the bar, and eventually, when they're there, all the killing starts in the camp, of course, and everybody is getting offed one by one by one by one. We also have Crazy Ralph in this one, and he gets killed finally because he was okay for the first movie, but for using him in the second movie, he was basically, was he the first guy to die? I'm not sure, or the cop who was following Jason. I think that was the first guy to die. He gets a hammer in the head again with the claw part. Again, if you see the uncut version, you see his face longer, and you see blood squirting out of the head. If you have the uncut version with all the uncut scenes are all just extended gore scenes. Because the MPAA was actually pretty pissed with Steve Cunningham that he got away with what he did in the first one. That they said, okay, listen, we're gonna give you that one, but the next one's gonna be a little less gory. And they said, okay. But they did make those scenes, the gory scenes, but they had to cut them out, of course, because of the MPAA. But they were filmed, and they were actually found somewhere in a vault in a studio, and they finally made it to I believe to a DVD edition, and I think restored to a certain extent, because the ones that I have are like grainy looking, but you can still make out what's happening. Now, Paul and Ginny go back. They see everybody's dead at some point. Like I said, Crazy Ralph, by the way, he gets killed. And there's also this scene. He's basically like being a pervert and a peeping Tom. Ginny and Paul are gonna have sex, but Ginny wants to say something to Paul, and that's something I always wondered. She's like, Paul, and he says, shh, shh, and he kisses her. Now, there are a few reasons that there are a few things that I think that she wanted to say. It's that moment that Ralph gets killed by this, I think, barbed wire, and again in the extended uncut version, you see him getting, the kill is longer. Sorry, and you see the blood coming from his throat because it's barbed wire, right? But it's not something to write home about. Most of the kills until now aren't that spectacular. There are two kills that I thought were kind of spectacular. One especially. That were cut out and then put back in. And I think the deluxe edition, there is an edition I think out there that has a kind of restored or maybe good restored versions of these uncut scenes. Now, eventually Paul fights Jason, and he gets knocked out, and Ginny is the final girl, and she has to save the day. Now I have to say, and that's the story basically. So what we have here is a much more fleshed out movie. The movie is the characters are more fleshed out. Ginny, for example, being a psych major, she was thinking about Jason and thinking about if the legend would be real and Jason was real, he would be a man-child, and he would have seen the whole thing happening on the beach, and that's why he became crazy. Now, in my opinion, if he was alive all this time, why didn't he went to his mom, and all those kills from the first movie could have been prevented, right? So, like I said, it's almost like they're retconning first of all the date of his drowning, and then some of the parts that why Jason didn't went to his mom. I just don't understand that. So they listen. It's like Halloween. They wanted to make one movie, Friday the 13th. They wanted to make one movie, but it was a great success, and a sequel has to come. So you gotta have to make something. Now Halloween 2, they did a great job in my opinion. And with Friday the 13th Part 2, they didn't do in continuation, they didn't do a great job in my opinion. That the continuity was a little bit all over the place. I mean, it takes place first in 79, and 5 years later we're in 1984 with a camp counseling center, you know. And those are, we'll start with the cons. Also, there is a moment when Paul is fighting Jason. So they're in the cabin. Everything is dark, and Ginny says, "Paul, there's somebody in this room." And Paul says he doesn't answer, and then Ginny says, "Paul, there's somebody in this fucking room." And then you see Jason with his pitchfork going towards Paul. He's fighting him, and she's just standing there and looking at him. Now I thought, then you think, okay, she wasn't that good of a final girl, maybe, but then she does these things that I thought, okay, that's something none of the final girls ever did. If they attacked him, that was because they were cornered. In my opinion, the worst final girl of the Friday the 13th series as the human Jason from part 1 to 4 is Alice. Not killing Mrs. Voorhees 3 times when she's down. Sorry. I mean, Laurie Strode did drop the knife multiple times, but she stabbed him in the neck with a sewing needle, stabbed him in the eye, stabbed him in the chest. I mean, she didn't know he was inhuman, right? He could withstand 6 slugs in his body. I mean, he was inhuman. He was the devil, like they said, like Loomis said, the devil himself. So she gets a break for that. But Ginny, she just, I mean, but Ginny just stares at him when he's fighting him, and that's sort of a con. Like I said, also the hairy Jason at the end, I thought that was a con too. I mean, like I said, continuity. Jason, you know, who picked, if that was really Jason, he was bald. In the comics of Victor Miller, Jason is bald too. Maybe Mrs. Voorhees shaved his head bald. But I think he couldn't grow hair out of that deformed head. I'm not sure. And also, in the third one, of course, he's bald, and he's a lot scarier than he's bald, because if he with the beard and all that shit, that was played by Warrington Gillette. He got that one scene. That's it. So that's actually it's really pretty fucked up if they didn't put Steve Dash, who was playing Jason, you know, with the sack hat over his head, and didn't credit him in the credits, in the after credits. or before the beginning credits. Okay, and you couldn't really see. Okay, you could see his deformed eye, you know, a little bit, but not as well as when he was bald, you know. And when he was bald, he looked creepier with those few teeth that he had in his mouth. He looked way creepier. Also, the calm is what the fuck happened with Paul. It's always there's this entire thing going on with Paul Holt. You know, was he dead? Wasn't he dead? The Steve Miner said, I got an article here at the end, that the dream sequence at the end was actually not a dream sequence. It was actually Jason for real coming through the window with the machete in his clavicle, you know, and taking Ginny, and that Paul would defend Ginny and die. But the entire idea was that Amy Steele would return for part 3, which she wanted to do, but her agent said, don't do it, you're gonna get better roles. She didn't, and I think the best role she got was 5 or 6 years later in April Fool's Day, a really great slasher, but she always regretted it. And in that article it says that apparently it probably would have been a college slasher, who knows, because she's at college, she's doing her laundry, she hears something tumbling, a little bit this rinse and repeat of the same with Alice finding a head in the fridge. In this case, she finds Paul's head in the washing machine. But they don't say what happened with what happens with Ginny after that. So I guess she probably survived, but she knew that Jason was still out there, and you know, maybe then we had a completely new story, except with, you know, with the other characters from part 3. It would have been a completely different movie, in my opinion. Probably maybe a college slasher, like I said, or she would have went back to a other camp that would maybe open to warn these people to become the crazy Ralph in that movie, maybe. Who knows? But she would have found his head tumbling in a washing machine. There's also a picture of him like this, and there's an alternate ending, where a stupid alternate ending where the head of Pamela Voorhees in the shack opens her eyes, smiles, and winks. That when Ginny is saved by the paramedics and she's yelling for Paul, where's Paul, Paul, that we go to that scene with the head, she smiles and winks, and there is a picture, I believe, from that movie with the alternate ending, with Paul's body in the shack like this. But that wasn't a real kill scene. That was apparently John Fury just being stupid, playing a gag, and doing something funny. That was a picture of him doing something funny. A wound that he got from fighting Jason. And like I said, I never really knew what she wanted to say to Paul before they had sex. I think she wanted to say, Paul, because Paul, when he spoke to the counselors, he said towards the women, if you have your period, this is bear country, be clean, because the blood, you know, the bears can smell the blood. Maybe she wanted to say she has her period, and that because in the morning when she is awake, he wrote, be aware of bears on the mirror. So maybe she had her period, or she was pregnant. Who knows? Who knows? Or she had another boyfriend. I mean, you don't really know what she wanted to say. I didn't look that up. Maybe you can find it somewhere, but I didn't look that up. Maybe, but I think that would be the most logical, is that she had her period, and that's the reason why he said beware for bears or something. Beware for bears, with the lipstick on our mirror in the morning after. Yeah, because he made that speech about women being clean with their menstrual cycle and all that shit. Also, a fun fact: the Vicky, the girl that was infatuated with Mark, the wheelchair guy, was in fact in real time during the movie really infatuated with Mark. But Mark was gay and she didn't know that. And then, of course, her world plummeted down when he said, sorry, I'm gay. But what I like about this movie is, I mean, there's this moment when Ginny is just okay. So for the most part, she's running away from Jason, right? And there's this scene where she's like waiting behind the bushes for him. She's literally waiting for him to come to her with his pitchfork, kicking him in the balls. I mean, that's something I've never seen before in any Friday the 13th movie. Somebody waiting for Jason to kick him in the nuts. And that was a pro. That was a real pro. And of course, the ending, that she knew about his psychology and that she could, fake being his mom. That was pretty well done. And it's that made Ginny such a good final girl. She wasn't, although waiting for him behind the bushes to kick him in the balls was maybe not the smartest idea, because she could have, he had a pitchfork, I mean, but okay, she had figuratively balls to do that. But like I said, the pros are the characters were more fleshed out, the comedic relief guy was a little bit more fleshed out. Sandra and Jeff were the horny couple. Although sex doesn't mean you die, because Ginny and Paul had sex, and they. Now Paul, again, if you watch the trivia of the fan trivia, it says he's deceased. And like I said, there's that little that I put on the screen, that Steve Miner actually didn't want a dream sequence at the end that was real, and that he died during that fight, and that Ginny was supposed to come back and his head would be found in the and that would have been cool in my opinion, and that would give some closure to Paul, because I always because if I have to say, my favorite character in this movie is Amy Steele if it comes to a final girl, but I like Paul too. Why? Because Paul is one of the few guys that went toe to toe with Jason and kind of gave him a hard time. It's almost like Jason wasn't on par with his strength, but it doesn't compute. Again, it doesn't, because in part 3 he's like just smashing somebody's head in, and in part 4 he's like ripping heads off, and it's all in one sequence in a few days, right? So Paul went toe to toe with Jason twice, in the cabin and in the shack. Okay, and he lost, but he went toe to toe with him, and that's why I liked Paul. So Paul and Amy Steele. So I've got two favorite characters. I've got Ted as my least. No, Terry. Sorry, Terry as my least. Ted was kind of. He was like. okay, it was comedic relief and his jokes were stupid, but there's something about him that I thought was he's the epiphany of not guilty. You know, he's the good guy. You know, he's the, you know what I mean? He's the guy you can go and get a beer with. You know, he looked like that. But Terry, I didn't like Terry. That girl, the sexy girl of the movie, but the way she dressed, and Scott was constantly going after her, and she was tease. She was a fucking tease. She was a fucking tease. Come on, and then completely nude in the water. Apparently, when she goes in the water, there, if you listen well, there is a mingle of the soundtrack of Jaws when she goes in the water. Yeah, for real. I shit you not. I mean, they could have got copyrighted for that shit. But like I said, I thought she was a fucking tease, and it's sad that we never see her dead, because it's cool how Scott dies. You know, the uncut version, that's a cool kill, because like I said, he's hung upside down by the bear trap. She has to release him. She goes to find a scissor or a knife, but then he gets the machete kill, the throat slit, and then you see blood, and that's the uncut version going all over his face. But when she arrives, his head is completely clean. So that was never mentioned to be in the movie, to put in the movie that the head was clean. You could see the cut, but you couldn't see blood all over his face, which is logical, because if you cut somebody's, like I said, the blood would go all over his face if he's upside down. But my favorite kills are two kills. The theatrical version had the kill of Mark, the wheelchair guy. I mean, that kill you don't see coming at all. If you were somebody in the theater, the first time you're seeing that movie in 1981, and you're like, the music is kind of slow, but not that super eerie, and out of nowhere he gets this machete straight to his face, and he goes from the stairs, he goes off the stairs, and I mean, Jason really didn't have any compassion, even when the guy was in the wheelchair. Oh, that's one of my favorite kills of one of the favorite kills of the entire franchise. And then in the uncut version, and that's why I'm taking a second favorite kill, is the uncut kill that we see. That's also in A Bay of Blood in 1973, when we see the uncut version of that kill that was ripped off in this movie, where Jeff and Sandra are having sex. Jeff is on top of Sandra, and the spear goes right through Jeff's back. We see the spear going through right through them, and then you see this Jason. You see the wound, you see the spear in his back, and you see him like pouring with an oar in soup, and you see the blood squirting out everywhere, and you hear them all like a pretty horrifying scene. Especially when it was like pouring like that. Also, Vicky gets killed in a. You don't see the stab. She gets stabbed, like I said, but you see the take is a little bit longer on her face, and blood's coming out of her mouth instead of no blood coming out of her mouth and just falling to the ground in theatrical cut. Like I said, that kill, the spear kill, I'll put pictures on there, and the machete kill, that's my favorite kill. And if you don't know who Ted is, I'll put a picture of Ted and my two favorite characters, Paul and Ginny, on the screen. Also, the fact is, everybody's complaining about the burlap sack that Jason had, but what did he have? He was probably very insecure about his face. And what did he had for his disposal than a sack, right? It also shows that he could only see at one eye because he only made that one eye hole, right? I do like the remake Jason with the, like, he had this cloth around his head, you know, this mummy cloth. It was pretty cool. That was better, but here, okay, he didn't have a lot of choices. Then, you know, later on he gets the hockey mask, the iconic hockey mask. But also they say the body count in this movie was 9, and a total of 12, including the people in the shed. But on the TV in part 3 they say 8. Again, where the fuck is Paul? Also, something that a lot of people don't know is that when Ginny's hiding under the bed and there's this rat coming under, a rat coming towards her, and you see this pea-like liquid, you think is Ginny pissing herself because she's scared. But she said no, that wasn't piss, that was Coke. But that didn't look like Coke. That was, if it was a beverage, then it was like Fanta or orange juice. But this wasn't Coke. It was yellow. But okay, that's something that they. I think she really didn't want to pee herself because I think she still saw herself as a strong woman, and sorry, peeing herself would be, you know. Also, she was supposed to die apparently, but because they loved Amy Steele so much, and really wanted her in the sequel of part 2, that they kept her alive. But officially, Paul is dead. Officially. Uh, if you have to believe the director, Paul is dead. Paul is as dead as he can be, and apparently the ending wasn't a dream sequence, according to Steve Miner. But that doesn't, again, compute, because if we see the third movie, it starts right where it left off, him, you know, pulling the machete out of his body and just moving, you know, in his red, his hillbilly outfit, and, you know, going for another outfit. And then 48 seconds were cut apparently by the MPAA. So those 48 seconds were those gore scenes that I just mentioned: the spear, the, you know, the throat slit of Scott when he's hanging upside down, Ralof, you know, being the shot being longer on Ralof and the blood coming out of his neck. Alice, the nose, the ice pick coming through her nose, which was weird again, like a nose piercing. And then oh yeah, the cop getting the hammer in his head, blood squirting out, and you see him going down a little bit slower. And oh, and Vicky getting stabbed, and blood coming out. And I believe a little longer, the camera was put a little longer on Mark with the machete in his face when he's rolling backwards off the stairs. And that's about it. That's about it. But like I said, the movie is the pros are, it's a lot, you know, more fleshed out. The characters are more fleshed out. You had better characters. Like I said, you had Bessie Palmer coming back for a cameo, because when Ginny is trying to lure Jason, as, you know, to, you know, basically uh, think that Ginny is his mom. You see Betsy Palmer's face coming, you know, in the picture, and she didn't mind coming back for that role, but she thought it was also ridiculous because she thought Jason was dead. But as we all know, Betsy Palmer had a pretty when she didn't like something, she didn't like something. But like I said, you got that pro, and you got Ginny, great final girl, a smart one, you know, very smart one. She really wanted to take the car, but because it wasn't working, okay, she goes to the next option. She tries to slow him down, kick him in the nuts. I mean, I liked Paul. Like I said, he goes head to head, toe to toe with Jason twice, and maybe three times actually, because if you believe that the last sequence when the sequence with when him coming out of the window wasn't a dream sequence, then he goes toe to toe with him three times. But that would be his demise if there would be a part 3 with Amy Steele. And then, like I said, like Ted, the comedic relief guy, you know, like I said, he looked like a guy I can go get a beer with. He wasn't annoying like Ned was in the first one. Weirdly enough, like I said, they use a lot of the same names of these characters, of these younglings that get killed in, in a lot of the same in a lot of the sequels. They use a few of those names twice or even three times. I don't know exactly which ones, but yeah, if you pay attention, you're gonna notice that there are a lot of names being repeated. The only cons is, yeah, it's basically the continuation is just all over the place. It's just fucked up. It's fucked up. And if you see the sequel to that, it was a success again. So they had to make a sequel, but then without Amy Steele, and that was a problem. So they had to retcon the dreams, the the sequence where he jumps through the window, and that was a dream sequence, and Paul's fate is unknown, and we get all that shit again. So that's a little bit of a con. Alice dying wasn't a con. I think like I said, she wasn't a really good final girl, and I think it was a fitting end for her because she really wanted to just kill me off. But like I said, the kill was weird, and there was no drop of blood. It was like a nose piercing with the ice pick. It was really, really weird if you see the uncut version at least. I think the theatrical cut is more logical because he goes, I think he stabs her in the, almost in the ear, but now he comes out here through the nose. If you see the uncut version. There's a really quite way for the people who want to collect something. There's a cool action figure again from the series NECA, the Sackhead Jason. It comes with all those cool weaponry that he uses: the pitchfork, the machete. What did he use? More, he used multiple weapons. He had the sack. You have the head, his head with his hair, and you have the you have the sack that you can put on him. It's a pretty cool action figure. I own it too. So I'll put a picture on it so you can, if people wanna. It's about, this one is a little bit more expensive nowadays because it's an older figure, but it's maybe for $55 you can get one. I saw it for $55 on eBay, so yeah, it's a more fleshed out movie. It's a more fleshed out movie. You've got more kills. You've got more. The characters are more fleshed out than in the first one. The first one were just cannon fodder, you know. You've got a better final girl. You've got a. Jason is a cooler. I mean, although Mrs. Voorhees was a cool killer, but it's a different Jason, so it's a different take on him. Some people like him, some people don't. I didn't mind that. It's something different, and it did make sense to me because where is he? Was he gonna get a hockey mask from or something? You know, maybe a Michael Myers mask or something. And like I said, I liked it. I liked it. I like the movie, the characters, the soundtrack, that they're more fleshed out, the kills, even the theatrical version where the kills were not as gory. I still liked it more than in the first one. Steve Miner did a great job, a really great job. And like I said, the guy. The other guy, I think his name is John Fuller. I'm not sure. John Fuller. He's the guy who did the special effects. Like I said, they wanted to take Stan Winston instead, but he couldn't. So they took him, and he became an A-lister apparently later on in his career. The only cons, like I said, are the continuation thing, and especially if you've seen this movie in 1981, you can think, okay, that's all good, but still, you're like, but didn't he drown in 57? So he's like 40, 50 years old. But yeah, okay, but it made money, so there you go. And this one made money, so there you go with the next one. And that one is in 3 fucking D, which I hate. I don't like 3D movies. That's a preference, but the world is dizzy enough for me. So no, like I said, Terry. I didn't like Terry. She was this fucking tease running around. She was kind of a bimbo. She was like a little bit dumb, in my opinion. She was. I'm not sure. I didn't like her. She was a beautiful woman, but I just didn't like her. Didn't like the character. And it's a shame that we didn't see a cool kill. We know she gets killed off screen, and then she's in the shack, laying there in the corner, but we don't know what happened to her. You don't see any blood or something. Maybe her neck got broken or something. I'm not sure. I believe we see her, Alice, and the deputy in the shack. Those 3 bodies you see in the shack with Pamela's head, with Mrs. Voorhees' head. So that being said, yeah, check it out, man. It's a great movie. Friday 13 Part 2. It's a lot better than Part 1. It's my second favorite one of the entire franchise. It gets an 8. So it's a multiple repeatable one. If you can get the uncut version, take a look-see. It's 48 seconds, but it's fun to see those extra gory scenes, right? The spear kill especially is pretty cool, and Scott getting, sliced in his neck sliced, and the blood flowing through his head is pretty gnarly too. A few weird kills, like I said, the ice pick scene, ice pick kill, that was weird, but I think it's a deluxe edition. I'm not sure. I'm not gonna quote that, but I think they want to bring out a DVD out. That's about with the uncut version, with the uncut scenes in there. So no, give it a look-see, give it a try. I give it a thumbs up, and see you next time. Bye bye.